Good evening, everyone, and good evening to Belinda, who is joining us as our guest this evening.
Hello.
Hey, how you going?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, dried out a bit down there?
Yeah, but we've just got more weather warnings today, so I think we've got more rain on the way.
Awesome, just what you need.
Yeah, we're staying dry.
That's good. That's the main thing. Excellent. So we've got you here tonight, Belinda, to talk about one-person birds. And that's not my favourite term, but it is a pretty good descriptor of like the sort of situations that we want to talk about a little bit tonight. And it's certainly a really common issue that pops up in consults, birds that for whatever reason only like one particular owner and aren't good at socialising either with other family members or with visitors. So I think this is a bit of a passion topic for you.
So it's a little bit of a lived experience for me over the past 10 years. And I guess one-person birds, I guess it's an easy shorthand for, like you described, a bird that has a stronger bond or prefers the company of one family member. And I think maybe particularly the ones that use some fairly maybe offensive behaviour to make their displeasure at other family members known.
Yes.
Because I think that's when it becomes a bit of a problem in a household.
Yes, yeah, I agree. It's one thing if they're kind of just not that keen to interact and do their own thing. It's very different if they become offensive about their displeasure.
Yes, especially I think they're able to move quite quickly and quite agilely with the very pointy body parts on their face. So
yes, they can be surprisingly quick. Yes. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So obviously we are taking questions tonight. So if you have a question about a one-person bird that you share your life with, whether it's a bird that likes you and you're its one person, or you're sharing your life with a bird that likes somebody else in your household, pop your questions down in the comments so that we can answer those for you. And I know we did get a question. I'll have to find it again now, but maybe we can start with Belinda talking a little bit about the situation that she's dealt with for the last 10 years and talk about how she's kind of best managed that and her tips and tricks for living with those birds.
Yeah, so I mean, I was living the dream. I met my now husband at a Parrot conference, which is exactly what you want to do if you're a bird lover, right? And I came to the relationship with, I think I had 12 pet parrots at the time. They were all small birds. So I had a couple of conures and some princess parrots and some cockatiels and budgies. And they're all, pretty inoffensive. And my husband, Steve, he had at the time one male yellow named Amazon called Danny. And he was about 3 years old and had been living with just Steve prior. And they had and have an excellent bond. They're BFFs, if you will. And I think, maybe it's a little bit stereotypical for male Amazon parrots, but Danny was not all that keen on sharing his number one person with somebody else. So that was kind of the experience straight up, and it's been to, I guess, greater and lesser degrees of, aggressive behavior towards me, depending on various factors. But certainly for the most part in those 10 years, Danny and I have had fairly limited, hands-on interaction. And then just depending, sometimes that has escalated to, aggression from him towards me in certain contexts. And certainly at its worst, it's been aggression towards me in all contexts. Although I feel a little bit like a fraud right now because Danny and I are enjoying a very unusual period of, I would almost describe friendship. It's been a few weeks now since he's shown any aggressive behaviour towards me, and we've even been able to have some little play times with some wrestly business and nice things like that.
Yeah, look, I've got to admit the photos of you with your fingers in Danny's mouth, I'm like, what?
Yeah, it's I mean, Steve thinks I'm a little bit of a weenie. I think he would encourage me to be a bit more bold more often, but I've learned that lesson. And it always starts playtime with Danny. It starts with protected contact, I guess you could say. I'll have my hand tucked in the hoodie, and if he's gentle through the hoodie, my fingers will come out and it will turn into a game. And it's been really nice. And then I guess the other experience that I've had more recently with one-person birds, if we're going to call them that, is a little crimson-bellied conure that I hand-reared 2 years ago, who quite abruptly, when he was probably only 4 or 5 months old, decided that he didn't really think that Steve should exist in the universe. And so for the last couple of years, as well as, being not the one person with Danny, I have been the one person with Scramble. And so I've certainly been managing interactions from both sides of the equation.
Yeah, so it's a different perspective on the situation as well. So how funny, at such a young age, he decided that he wasn't really a big fan of Steve.
Yeah, it was quite abrupt as well, because it went from, he would seek to hang out with Steve to snuggle, as conures do. They tend to melt into little fluffy puddles, especially when they're babies. And then it turned into, fairly, conures can look a little bit funny when they're very angry, because they tend to be quite fluffy and make funny noises and make funny body postures. But, it was this little bird, 4 or 5 months old, who was quite, being very outspoken in his opinion of Steve.
He's very outspoken in general, isn't he?
He is. I think he's quite a sassy little bird, yes.
Excellent, cool. So at I guess your worst point, so when Danny was, like you said, kind of in all contexts going out of his way to engage in aggressive behavior with you, what were you kind of doing in order to manage that?
So it definitely affected how often and when Danny could be out of his cage or in the same space as me. So I guess we've always had the house set up so that different birds can be out at different times in different places. And that also means that there are different places that I can be. So, for example, Steve might have taken the opportunity to spend some time with Danny while I was spending time in the little bird's room, just so that they could have that interaction without, Danny feeling worked up that I was in the room, and without Steve feeling stressed that, there might be conflict between, his two favourite beings, I hope. So certainly that physical separation was really important. Obviously, whether it's Danny or it's Scramble that we're talking about, Steve and I both try and be really empathetic about the fact that the other person should be able to move around in the house without limitations. So, if I was trying to do laundry or if I was cooking, it would be really important that Danny was not in the same room. So he'd be in his cage or playing in the bird room or playing in our outdoor enclosure. We really tried to avoid those situations where there would be ongoing conflict between us. And then, also, if there were situations where perhaps we thought the risk was quite low, I was really thinking about it today. I've probably been bitten by Danny probably only 3 or 4 times in 10 years. So that sounds like relatively few, but when it's, it's quite a shock when it's a medium-sized parrot that's flown at you with the intent of biting. And certainly that, creates an association of anxiety and fear and stress. So in situations where, unless I would say to you, I bet you $100 right now that Danny is okay. He's not going to fly at me, which is how we're feeling at the moment. If there was any doubt whatsoever, I would quite often be wearing a hoodie. So that would, protect my head and neck area. And sometimes I would even carry a little cushion around if I had to move through the space, just in case I needed to deflect him. Not like a baseball bat to whack him out of the air, but just physically to block, because, certainly each unhappy encounter in my learning history is going to severely affect the likelihood of me taking any chances around Danny again. And we also don't want Danny to be practicing that sequence of behaviour either. So anything we could do to minimise that was really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. So tip number one is have multiple areas set up so that everybody can coexist but get what they need at the same time. So
absolutely.
You didn't have, like you said, you had rooms so that you could go in and spend time with some birds while Denny was loose in the house, or vice versa. And then obviously, like you said, respecting everybody's space and the understanding that, both yourself and Steve needed to be able to freely move around your own home without the threat of violence over your head.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know speaking with some of our family friends who are maybe not bird people, sometimes the management strategies that we've had in place at various times can seem really extreme. But, I think Danny is a really important bird in our family. And there are times where his biology is telling him that I'm not a person that should be in the house. And so we're just working to accommodate that in a way that minimises stress for me and for him as well. While still preserving mine and Steve's relationship as well.
That's the tough part, managing not just the bird-human relationships, but also the human-human relationships, because those can get testy as well when one person has a really strong relationship with the bird, and that bird isn't aggressing at somebody else in the house that maybe doesn't have that relationship with them. It certainly gets very tricky.
Yeah, and I think, my experience has certainly been that the work that needs to be done is not usually on the part of the person who is on the receiving end of the interactions. It's really the management and, if desired, the training on the part of the person who has the relationship with the bird that's probably going to be able to set the household up for success better than trying to get, two individuals who are quite stressed around each other interacting. Possibly our situation is a little bit unique in that Steve's work has him away from home for some fairly lengthy periods. So when I am in a situation where I need to be interacting with Danny, even through the cage bars, I'm still looking to minimize the aggressive behavior he's displaying there as well. So I'll try and minimize my interactions with him even through protected contact. So through those cage bars. And with our recent interactions, Steve was away for nearly 2 months. And I didn't start letting Danny out of the cage until I was able to be, in the room or changing his food and water without any sort of body language from him that indicated he was stressed. So we really took it slowly. Even though I guess conventional wisdom would say this bird needs to be out of its cage, it's not helpful to anyone if he's practicing something we don't want him doing. Yeah,
that's it. And that's why management's so important, like you said.
Avoid it. Avoid the problem in the first place if you can.
Yeah. And I think that's where sometimes people get a little bit stuck because, like you said, people, everyone's worried the bird needs time out of the cage. Maybe it's going to get worse if I keep it in the cage all of the time. But then we put the bird and potentially other people in the situation of the birds practicing that behaviour and finding that it's successful. And that's just ramping it all up more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, it's just so important. I know that Steve and Danny have got such a unique relationship. You know, Danny can be in full, we could call it angry Amazon posture, you know, with his crown feathers are up and his nape is all flat at the back of his neck and his eyes are bright orange and his tail's flared and his wings are out from his body. And Steve can walk over there and just, you know, give him a big old smooch and they'll fall about and wrestle. But, you know, for me, I'm very mindful that even just a little flash of the eye as I walk into the room, that could signal that, you know, potentially today could be a day where Danny is, you know, he could fly towards me. And, you know, that could be the 5th time that he's bitten me. So I'm just really mindful of things like that. And if we can prevent him from having more practice in his little behavioural repertoire, I think it's, you know, better in the long run. And, you know, maybe Danny's what's Danny turning this year? I think Danny's turning 16 years old this year. Who knows? Wow. Maybe when he's 30, he'll have chilled out. And if we can just keep him from practicing in these sort of spicy hot years, I think it's going to bode better for a long-term peaceful relationship between us.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And so in there, I've also picked out, obviously, you're talking a lot about recognizing Danny's body language and being able to pick up on when he is a bit, I love the word spicy because it's such a good descriptor, especially for Amazons, but you're really tuned into his body language and his interactions with you and how his behavior is when, you know, so like you said, when Steve was away, you're going in, you're changing, you know, water, cleaning the cages and monitoring his body language to see where he's at. And it took a while before you felt like he was in the right place for you to start moving towards bringing him out of that space to spend more time elsewhere in the house. So obviously really important to, recognize that body language.
Yeah, and even just, you know, so recognizing that body language. And I mean, Amazon's bless us with crystal clear body language. You know, they're the poster child for it. But I mean, just things that sort of intuitively would make sense. If I was in that room with Danny and Felix are in separate cages side by side, and, you know, perhaps I would have asked Felix to go back in his cage. I might reward him with a couple of sunflower seeds for that. And then I might offer Danny a sunflower seed. I can do that safely through the cage bars. But if that's causing him to growl and to have his eyes flash and his tail flare a little bit, that's probably not building the happy associations that you would hope a little bit of treat training would do. It's still going in his little diary of, you know, this human being sucks. I don't want them near my cage. So, you know, in that context, it wouldn't be at all helpful to our relationship for me to stand there and feed him seeds, even though that's advice you might, you know, typically receive on, you know, Facebook message boards or something like that. So it was really over time, you know, it might be that I would drop a seed or two in his bowl as I put Felix away and then I'd just leave. And that was a more effective way of, you know, building up that association of me bringing good things because I wasn't also imposing my unwanted company on him at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, like you said, it is the sort of advice that you see a lot on social media and that. And, you know, regularly when I go to consults for birds that are kind of behaving in similar fashions, often people are attempting to have people approach the cage and offer treats through the cage, but the bird's body language is clearly indicating what they really want is that person to be nowhere near their cage.
Yeah,
and sometimes they'll take, and sometimes they'll take the treat, but they, you know, it's very kind of grabby and they'll end up pinching fingers in the process of grabbing the treat, or they'll take the treat and then drop it on the ground almost immediately. And so, like you said, you're not making that positive association that you're hoping to make when you're walking up to the cage and kind of imposing on their space like that. And so that's a really big thing as well.
Yeah, and that is something that we notice with Scramble, my conure. Most of our birds are in, you know, their cages are in different rooms off the living room, but the conures are in the living room. And certainly when Steve moves through the house, Scramble does display some aggressive behaviour. So from a management point of view, it would probably make more sense for him to be somewhere else. But then on the balance of it, for him to be in the centre of the house and, you know, getting all of the, I guess, that passive social time, he's getting some company more often than if he was somewhere else. We've sort of just weighed it up that way. And, you know, I hate to say it, but he is a smaller bird. It is not quite such a terrifying thing to have a 80-gram conure behaving that way as it is a 550-gram Amazon. Danny can thank me later because I just shaved a few grams off his weight, but you know, it's definitely something to be mindful of. And if it is a, you know, with Scramble, we're quite happy to just manage it that Scramble only comes out when Steve's not around. I certainly don't perceive there to be any interest whatsoever in Steve and Scramble being friends, and that's fine. But certainly if we were talking to someone who did have an interest in, you know, making progress on a relationship with a bird that was currently not their friend, I would probably look to change factors like that to just minimize the opportunities for that bird to experience stress and frustration in the presence of this second or third or fourth person. Yeah, awesome. So like tip number 3 would be wary of their space. You know, make sure that we're not imposing ourselves onto their space when we, you know, especially if, like you said, we're trying to make friends, because it's just exacerbating that feeling that they've got at the moment. Yeah, which, you know, it's going to be, you know, very important parrot business. I need to get this person out of my space. They shouldn't be here. And we can explain it in all the human ways that we like, but, you know, they've clearly got some pretty strong reasons to be behaving that way. And then I guess
big feelings.
Big feelings. I think as well, like, you know, I've worked with clients where you've got one crazy bird person in the house and everyone else doesn't really want anything to do with the bird. I think that's fine. But, you know, do just weigh up, you know, what percentage of the day is this bird experiencing stress and conflict in how we're managing it, because obviously their welfare should come into it too. I think if Scram's feathers were exploding out of him because he was so stressed to be in the room with Steve, we would change what we're doing. If it's just a little bit of angry stomping up and down the perch when Steve gets up to get a drink, I don't think that Scramble is suffering too badly for that, for the overall benefit of interacting with us in the living room. Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It's weighing up the cost versus benefit as well. So, and, you know, how that fits in with your long-term goals with that bird. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So what sort of other management and environmental changes have you made to try to get on top of these problems, or to at least make it more livable for everybody that's kind of there? So I think it is probably not a great surprise that some of Danny's worst behaviour has come when he's perceived nesting opportunities in the house. Certainly in the early days, so sort of 10 years ago as opposed to 4 years ago. A couple of the most challenging areas for us were the top of the kitchen cupboards. He liked to walk along up there and sort of look at the saucepans and look at the cupboards in the pantry when they were open. And then the adjacent linen cupboard and laundry as well. They were all very good spots for Steve to start laying eggs for Danny. And if I went near those spaces, that's where I would run into the most trouble. So certainly looking to minimise his access to those spaces. You know, I think it's a blessing that Steve and I both like birds as much as we do, because when we've gone to purchase things like couches and coffee tables and TV cabinets and things like that, we're always looking, you know, is there a space under this that Danny could perceive as a nest? If there is a space under this, can we modify it so that he can't? You know, just really looking to, as best as possible, minimize those opportunities for him, because we've seen repeatedly over time that his behaviour is much worse if he perceives nesting opportunities. Steve's quite careful. Danny loves a cuddle, loves a wrestle, but certainly if Steve starts to perceive that he's, maybe starting to see some reproductive behaviour, like a little bit of regurgitating, or we call it quacking like a duck, because I don't know if you have seen an Amazon starting to feel a little bit frisky, but it's that kind of noise. That's, a very clear signal for Steve that this interaction needs to stop. Danny needs to be redirected somewhere else. So I guess just mindful of things like that. I joked that I had shaved a few grams off Danny's weight before.
Yes.
We are quite mindful not to feed him in a way that would exacerbate reproductive behaviours. So he is not fine dining on lots of fruit and nuts and things like that. He's on his pellets and his green veggies and all the things that are not super exciting. And that that helps some when he really wants to be looking for nests. There's not a huge amount of anything that we're doing that's going to discourage him, and those tend to be the times where he and I mostly just stay separate from one another. When he's settled down again, we might start to look at neutral interactions in the same space, or like we are now, some happy interactions as well. Yeah, certainly. Diet can be a big thing, but when you've got the diet kind of very tightly controlled already, sometimes, and there are just, in my experience, some birds out there that, and sometimes some species that specifically seem to be more inclined towards breeding behaviour, even if they're on a, pretty strict diet. So I've got an eclectus parrot, Yes. Her diet's really well controlled, and she'll still spend most of the year looking for nesting spaces. So it is really something. We've had Amazons are really prone to becoming overweight, and at various times Danny and Felix have both, it would be fair for them to lose a little bit of weight. We've had them down to sort of 10, 11, 12 grams of pellets a day and green vegetables, and they're still just sitting there like, nah, we're all good, fat and happy. So I don't know, they've got pizza hidden under their newspaper or something, but stashes. We've had them on some very tightly controlled diets, and sometimes, he still sees that the cushion on the couch is at an angle that makes a dark shadow underneath, and he's like, well. Look at that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. There's, like I said, I've got an eclectus. It's very much similar with her, but hers is very manageable. So it's fun. Yeah, she's not trying to kill Tim or anyone else. No, she's really inoffensive like that, which is lovely. And often most of her nesting is done out in the flight aviary now. So she's digged a hole under a log or something. Nice, very good. Awesome. So, like you said, just managing the environment, reducing access to cavities where you can. That's really hard. Obviously I find in human houses, you walk in and it's cavity central. And I had a consult today with a lovely client with a sun conure who is very happily making his own cavities through the back of the couch. So. Yep. Yeah, no, just today actually, Scramble was looking at a little dark nook behind a pillow. He's just turned 2, so probably makes sense. But I was like, wait, we're not doing that, Scram. Get rid of that. So they definitely find those spaces. Certainly buying new furniture, wherever they're gone, it needs to almost touch the floor. There can be no gap, or it needs to be completely clear of the floor. It's not nest-like at all. And even Danny discovered that he could walk underneath their cage, which has got like a little storage section underneath it, and he can flatten himself a little bit and fit under there. So even just, I know it's on Steve's to-do list, just getting some planks of dark perspex or something to just block that access. It's not that big of a drama to do. And I guess depending on your aesthetic, you can do it, kind of shifty, or you could do it real nice. I think it's probably one of the most important things that you can do if it is a behavior you're having trouble with.
Yeah, and that's it. And this bird's literally chewing holes into the back of the couch to get into the furniture. It's
that would be really challenging.
Yes, it is. It's one of those, and it's like, well, if we take this couch away, then also it'll probably just move on to the next. And how, what do you do then? Just have no couch?
No couch, and put perspex on the wall so it can't chew into the wall cavity. And
exactly.
You can go crazy. I think sometimes if you're the one person, you can, like, I can get in there and redirect Scram's attention and give him something else to do. And likewise, Steve can often do that with Danny. I think we've got our management in place, and where it's not practical, we redirect and supervise. Yeah,
that's it. Excellent, cool. We've talked about all of those, proactive and also reactive management options and ways we can work on the environment, change the environment. Have you guys implemented specific behaviour modification protocols to work through? We obviously spoke about earlier, you were, doing the old treat drop in the food bowl when you go in to clean up. Are there any other training activities that you do or that you'd recommend people involve themselves in to try and rebuild that relationship with the animal?
So it depends a lot. So I know that, with Scramble and Steve, I can ask Steve, could you feed him some sunflower seeds? And Scram will eat them and seem quite happy. And then as soon as they've run out, he's just like, and now you die. So, when we sort of stop and consider what's the value of this, it's a little bit different to Danny. I don't get the impression that Scram's sitting there furiously eating the sunflower seeds. I do think that he is genuinely going like, oh, sweet, I love sunflower seeds. But I also don't think that that's necessarily having a far-reaching impact on his behaviour. I think he's just going, I like seeds, cool. With Danny, what kind of behaviour modification we do or don't do depends very much on his body language when I'm around. He has got quite a few sort of trained behaviours. So he's got some tricks. He's got his little recall to hand. He can step up and step off. He can go back into his cage. But something that certainly I've noticed, I'm quite mindful of, is that sometimes, even more recently when his body language had chilled right out and I could hand him treats without getting, flashy eyes or, flaring tail. If I then cued him to, say wave, which is a very low cost behavior for him, it's easy for him to do, it's got a strong reinforcement history, that would cause some body language to come again. So, seeds for free, that was fine. Asking him to do a cue, not fine. Again, if we're going, well, why are we doing this? Is it to improve the relationship? That goal is probably not being met then. But certainly, body language as a consideration when Danny is jalapeno spicy instead of habanero spicy, getting Steve to teach him some simple behaviours and then me cueing those behaviours and rewarding him, that has been a nice hands-off way that Danny and I can interact. It has given me a little pathway forwards. So I guess, going from just a treat, drop and leave to just handing him a treat to being able to cue simple behaviours, that's quite a nice pathway towards some positive interactions. And certainly that tends to be the sort of thing that I advise for clients, as well as looking at all the management and diet and handling. But it varies so much. Something that's been hugely helpful with Steve away, both Amazons, even when Steve's putting them back in their enclosures, they're quite accustomed to getting something tasty in their bowls when they go back in. And so that's almost become a hands-off, time to go back in. You get something nice, they walk in on their own. And that was a really, really big help with me being able to have them out when Steve was away, because it meant even if I wasn't 100% confident, I could pull my hoodie up and feel nice and safe. And I could go and drop an almond in their bowls as they walked in on their porches, onto their little perches. So, again, though, I guess the training responsibility primarily is on Steve in that context. He needs to train that response, because, just simply put, I don't have the relationship with Danny to be able to build brand new behaviours at this point. I think that, potentially some of the, if my training was a little bit sloppy or I wasn't clear, I think that any sort of frustration or confusion there would probably just, bottom out our little trust account again, which we definitely don't want.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So you've mentioned, obviously, your hoodie a couple of times, and so this is something that I'm familiar with as well. It's certainly a tactic that we occasionally use if we're working with birds that have a history of flying at faces and that. So can you walk us through any little, like you mentioned the hoodie and you mentioned your pillow earlier, are there any other safety measures that you or Steve put in place to protect yourselves if the birds are out? Obviously, the big one is that you're just not letting them into the space with you if you think that they're absolutely going to fly at your face or body to bite you as a starting point. But are those the main things that you have in place as kind of safety features for when you are having them out, or do you have other little things in place as well?
So Steve doesn't protect himself against scramble at all. And it's mostly my decision then to not have scramble out when Steve's around, because I just don't want there to be bad interactions between them. For me, it's mostly it's going to be a hoodie is my primary thing. And again, it's not, I don't put on the hoodie and then put myself in situations where I'm going to get bit, because that's not constructive for anybody. But rather I wear a hoodie to help myself feel safe, so that my feeling scared that I might get bit is just one less factor in that situation. Because I remind Steve quite often, it is scary to have a large bird flying at you with a very sharp beak. I don't, if we misjudge it and if Danny does fly at me, I want to make sure that the fallout from that is as small as possible, so that we can continue to build on neutral or happy interactions in future. And so that's why I usually choose to wear a hoodie, or to avoid situations where Danny would be out when he's likely to fly at me. And it just means, instead of feeling really scared that he's going to bite my face or my neck, I can just tuck my chin into my shoulder and Steve will come and remove him and usually return him to a different space after that. We tend not to aim for getting flown at, twice in a row or three times in a row in one evening. Yeah, we'll sort of go like, that's it. We're not feeling good about being in the same space tonight, so we're going to be separate.
I think that's important as well, because also once they've made that first attempt, it's likely that they're already a bit worked up, and so there's a much higher chance that they're going to make a second attempt after that as well. So I think recognizing that and going, okay, cool, this is, now's the time to separate this situation before it escalates any further.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely, gosh, it's a long time since I had my first budgie now. But I know that, they used to say like, oh, don't let them show you you're scared, or just ignore the bite. And it's like, I am scared and I'm not ignoring that bite because it hurts. So I think what I really think about is like, let's salvage this to make it so that this experience is minimally disruptive to our long-term goals. And then let's be mindful of it in future. So I would rather, if Danny is going to be out, I would rather chuck a hoodie on just in case and then be proven wrong. He's in a lovely mood and we're going to be best friends, than to assume that we're going to be best friends and then receive another bite, which is going to make me very scared for next time. So it's all about, I guess, like preserving what positive interactions that we have had together, so that hopefully we can build on them without taking, I guess, too many withdrawals out of that account, too many unhappy encounters together.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so everyone's suspiciously quiet tonight, but we do have a couple of questions, so I'll rattle those off.
I was going to say, I'm the only person in the world with this problem.
Wouldn't that be nice? Well, not for you, but
no. I was just going to add, I suspect it's a common feature. I don't know. Danny often gets along with almost anyone else he's introduced to, and the same is true of Scramble. So there's that extra, we've got the emotions of feeling quite stressed and quite scared, but then there's also a little bit of betrayal. That's a very human thing to put on it, but you sort of go, well, why?
But yes, it can be a little bit hurtful to realize that you're the one person in the world that this bird has decided that they just don't like.
Don't want you there. When push comes to shove, I do try and put my trainer's hat on and not take it personally, and it's all just behaviour. So Mike said wide-brimmed hats worked for him for protecting his ears and shoulders. Yep, I have got photos of me with hats on. I do tend to find, and depending on what I'm doing, it's something that I'm either worried about or not. I have sometimes found that a hat is aversive and that it's keeping Danny away because it's scary, whereas the hoodie doesn't seem to have that effect. So I am a little bit cautious of that. I don't want there to be unhappy encounters on Danny's. I don't want to be scared of Danny. I don't want Danny to be scared of me either. I'd be quite happy if we're just neutral. We just ignore each other. If we're going to have some nice encounters, that's fine too. But certainly I have worn a hat for the same reason, for protection. But I do watch the body language to make sure I'm not scaring the pants off Danny and trying to keep myself feeling safe. And then I have also got pictures of me in the garden in our outdoor enclosure wearing the big wide-brimmed Bunnings hat with two Amazons sitting on top of it, sort of peering under the brim to see what I'm doing. So that hasn't always worked either.
I mean, at least they're not near your face, I guess. So
there's some protection there. And definitely hoodies are a much nicer proposition down in Sydney, where I am now, than they were up in Townsville, which is where we've been for the last 10 years. I was thinking about you walking around in the heat and in hoodies. I guess that's where aircon comes in handy as well. Aircon and absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So Jeanette asked earlier, she said, and we've probably kind of answered this just running through what you've implemented, but essentially she has a son, Conyer, that's lived with her since he was 8 weeks old. She gets visitors, but she's been the only human companion for his almost 20 years of life. So needless to say, he's very bonded to her, as not terribly accepting of visitors. She would like to know what you might suggest to help him be more accepting of visitors. And I'll add that not accepting of visitors does include potentially flying at people and landing on them to bite them. So it's not a neutral situation either.
Yeah, okay. So I think when I think about visitors, and definitely if I think about how long they're going to be in the house for, if you've got someone visiting for 3 weeks, I think it makes sense to take some steps to, make things easier between them and the bird, because obviously for 3 weeks, you're going to want to have some kind of routine that gives the bird access to the house. But for shorter visitors, I think if we, do we need the bird and the visitors to interact in the first place. I think that's really important. Is it adding value to anyone's experience on that day? You know, is it going to be a positive thing for the little conure? Is it going to be a positive thing for the visitors? I think a lot of visitors, especially when they're not necessarily bird people, they do weird things when they get scared, and sometimes that can make it worse. You know, if they sort of jerk or exclaim or they swat, that can all go in that connure's little diary of new people are a bit scary and dangerous, and potentially I need to take action to get them out of my space. So if you're starting in protected contact with the little bird in a cage, you could set it up so that, you know, perhaps you start to associate when visitors come over, that's when you get your favorite foraging toy, or you get a little snack to work on. So you start to sort of go like, oh, they're sitting over there ignoring me completely, and I've got this nice thing to do over here. And I think that can be quite a fun way to get started. And then, you know, when it comes to our birds, I tend to go, does the visitor want anything to do with this bird? If the answer is no, if they're a bit scared, I'm going to keep them in protected contact because that interaction is probably not going to be great, even if the bird's really friendly. If they do want a little bit to do with the bird, you could maybe start with, you know, offering treats through protected contact. And that would be a really nice way, I think, to get started. And then if we are going to have new people handle our parrots, for example, we'll give really explicit instructions. This is how you ask them to step up. And depending on which bird, it might be different. You know, one might like an offered finger, one might like an offered palm, one likes a right palm, one likes a left palm. So we'll help them to interact with the bird in a way that is familiar and predictable, which is going to then minimize any sort of stress and conflict and hopefully aggressive behaviors. And hopefully make it easier for some new friends to start happening. And I think the friends I'd start with, like in that kind of context where you've got a 20-year-old bird who's not all that interested, you might have, you know, a handful of acquaintances, but one or two people that visit once or twice a week. I would start with the one or two people that visit once or twice a week that are going to be consistent presences in this bird's life, rather than, you know, the handyman who comes once or twice.
Yes. Yeah. And I think something that you said that's really valuable there as well is this adding value for anyone, and especially, thinking in terms of like also putting aside our personal feelings of I want my bird to interact with visitors, and also think in terms of, is that what my bird wants as well? So, or do they just find no value in interacting with strangers or visitors to the home, and it's actually just more stressful for them to be placed in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I think it's really common to think like, oh, it's better for the bird to be out of the cage and worse for them to be in the cage. But I think if you said, you know, for a lot of birds, they'd be like, no, I'd like to stay in my cage, thanks. It's safe in here and nobody touches me. You know, I think if being out of the cage is associated with higher stress, then it's not necessarily a good welfare choice to have that bird out, and probably not a good learning environment either. And I guess it also comes back to what you were talking about earlier with where you've positioned Scram as well. You know, the decision was made because there's more value in him being in that space. And so also, like you said, looking into things like, you know, how long is the visitor going to be there? How often the visitor is going to be there for, and how is that affecting the bird's access to freedom? And do we need to then look at doing the training in order to allow them to have, you know, more freedom because these people are around on a regular basis? So yeah, absolutely. You know, my dad was just up for 2 days, and we didn't really change anything much to do with our routine. You know, all of the birds could still be out when they would usually be out, but it was really interesting to just see which ones opted to sort of interact independently away from this new person and which ones opted to sort of come over and be really curious. So I think in the absence of aggression, certainly you can kind of take your lead from the bird a little bit and go, well, you're going to have better welfare over there doing your own thing. That's fine. Or, let's find some ways to make this interaction really nice and safe and happy for everybody.
Yeah. Excellent. Cool. Some good tips there for introducing to visitors and also considering whether it's the right thing to do for that bird. Yeah. All right. We've got a question from, I'm not sure if it's Sonia, so I apologize in advance if that's not how it's said. She said she's interesting chat. She has a female Indian ringneck that loves her, but she's hit breeding hormones and now I can't handle her. She bites me every time.
So you're the one person that's now not the one person, but you're the only person as well. We've got 11 birds at the moment, and they go through varying phases of wanting to be very hands-on to wanting to be very hands-off. And what I really make sure of is that even for the simple things like stepping up and stepping off and going back into their cage, things that I think are really easy to take for granted because they just happen. I try to stay in a really good routine where I'm reinforcing those behaviors with something tangible. So usually with food, so that when they are having some big feelings, whether that's for biological or physiological reasons, or it's because we've done something silly like painted our fingernails or worn the wrong t-shirt, we've got a really nice strong reinforcement history there, so that even if some things have changed and maybe they're not wanting to be on us the way that they have done for the last 6 months or 12 months, we've still got some of those nice basic training cues that we can fall back on that hopefully they'll still perform quite well. And that has been my experience generally. When you sort of switch from that sort of snuggly melt into your body baby bird to now I've got to go and find dark spaces under cushions. I often find that sort of putting my trainer's hat on and being a little bit more formal in how I'm cueing and rewarding behaviors. I think sometimes that can alleviate a little bit, things like handling and biting. And again, just taking the cues from them a little bit. If it was that she used to like to snuggle right in and maybe be, pet a little bit, if instead it's nicer for her to sit on a play stand nearby and just practice a little bit of training from time to time with food as the reward, that's okay. She'll probably swing in roundabouts and, you'll go through phases of more and less handling. But that's not it feels personal, but it's not. It's just one of those things with having, I guess, unusual pets. Dogs and cats tend to want to be snuggled all the time, but I think parrots are a little bit more variable, if that makes sense. I hope that helps a little bit. I agree 100%. And from personal experience here with Maya, my green-winged macaw, she's 3.5 now, and so we're certainly getting to that age now where she's not the snuggly little baby bird anymore, and instead she wants to do things and fly around or chew on a toy, or the way she wants to interact with me has changed. She doesn't want to turn into a puddle on my chest anymore for scratches, but she'll sit on my knee. Cute. It's adorable. And it gets people into trouble because they see those cute little baby green wings who are all just huddled on the person's lap getting snuggles, not realizing that in a couple of years' time that's not really what they're going to be like anymore. Absolutely.
Our interactions are different now, and we still hang out together, but she'll sit on my knee and she'll get head scratches instead, and that's just part of growing up as well. So certainly, being aware of the fact that our birds aren't going to be babies forever, and that they'll probably change the way they want to interact with us.
Absolutely.
I did also want to add in there that I think sometimes it's also, like, I want to say to people, it's okay to occasionally go, I need a break, and we're just getting into a cycle here of negative interactions, and maybe we need to take a couple of days where the bird just has a lot of foraging activities in their cage and everyone can just take a breather, because if you're getting stuck into this cycle, if you're letting your bird out but trying to get them back into the cage or interacting with them just leads to lots of biting, that's just going to keep snowballing and make it worse and worse. So sometimes taking that little step back and going, well, let's just take a couple of days. Here's a bunch of foraging toys to keep you busy while we both decompress from this situation.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And an analogy that I certainly use a lot with my dog training clients, and I think it's just as applicable for birds. Like I always describe, I guess, for their learning history, like following an interaction, they're going to go back and write in their little diary. And, you know, that little diary entry, it could say such and such sucks. And if they've written that on the last 10 pages because the last 10 interactions with you have been terrible, that's going to shape very strongly what they're going to do next time, because they're going to flick back through that diary and go, nah, this is not going to be good. I'm going to take some proactive steps here to avoid this. And so, like you said, it just snowballs. I was going to say something, but I can't think of it. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think we get really stuck in a routine. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, you've got to take a step back and go, is this helping or hindering my long-term goals? And if it's not helping, you really, like you said, you want to take a step back and just rethink what you're doing. Otherwise, you will just fall into a pattern that's going to lead to this bird staying in their cage all the time because it's horrible. Actually, something else that I was thinking of, I don't know how old this Indian ringneck is, but something I see quite commonly is if you've got quite a young bird, sometimes they're almost like putty, like you can get away with doing anything, and there's kind of no consequences to the human. You know, I'll often find like baby birds, you can push into them and they'll step up, or you can sort of, you know, and I'm not saying that you're doing this with this ringneck, but it's certainly something I see a lot, you know, like you'll push into them and they'll step up and you'll grab them off your shoulder and it's no worries, and you'll pop them back in their cage, cool. And then it's kind of, you know, as they mature a little bit, it's almost like they start to feel a little more confident in themselves, and their little diary entries have piled up to go like, man, this person just keeps doing this. And, you know, instead of just being potty and baby birds, they're like, no, actually, I'm going to nibble your finger and try and make you go away or stop what you're doing. So I think sometimes, you know, rather than that label of hormones, it's really just a product of learning history and, you know, their escalation from a really passive response to something that they don't like to a more proactive or aggressive response to something that they don't like.
Yeah, I see that all of the time. Literally just had, and I will add that in Indian ringnecks especially, this is often referred to as bluffing. So it's often like they get to about 5 or 6 months of age normally, and they start going, actually, no, not okay with that. And they bite, and it gets referred to as bluffing very, very commonly. It happens in other species, but they seem to have a very specific age where they're like, no.
Yeah, I think as well. I've had I have had actually quite a few Indian ringneck clients. I was going to say like, I haven't had so much to do with them. I haven't owned them myself, but I have worked with them. Yeah. And certainly my impression of them and my understanding is that they're not such a tactile species. So, you know, you'll get the younger ones, and you'll sort of be patting their head and they'll just be sitting there like, all right, I'm getting pat. Yeah. Compared to, you know, like a little cockatiel or a conure who sort of turns into this big fluffy cuddle monster. And so then it, you know, rather than that really overt pleasure from being interacted with that way, they're kind of just tolerating it. And again, it can come as quite a surprise when at 5 or 6 or 8 months old, they're not tolerating it anymore, and you're starting to get some biting.
Yes. Yeah. And this is, I guess, a really perfect example of why labels like hormones and hormonal or bluffing are really unhelpful, because it really like doesn't tell us what's going on. It doesn't give us, real observable behaviour to work with, and it doesn't tell us about the history of that bird. And so when we go back and look at it, we might find that, actually this has nothing to do with any kind of breeding hormones. This bird might only be 5 months old. And what we're really seeing is a bird who's gotten to the age where they're like, actually, I actually don't really like being handled in this way. And now I'm willing to communicate that in a bit more of a, offensive manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much so.
So awesome. Well, hopefully that's helpful anyways. And Sonia can implement some of that.
Yep.
A couple other little ones in here. Mike has asked whether we have found either male or female birds tend to be more of a one-person bird in general. So if it's more gender specific, or I would say personally I haven't seen it, and specifically in any one gender. I think it really comes more down to learning history and socialization history, and also individual bird preference.
Yeah, I think quite by chance, Steve and I have both got preferences for male pets. I don't know why. So I can say that the two examples that we live with, they're both males. But I've had clients with female birds. Lee, you seem to have gone opposite to me. You've got female birds, not males. I think it's all fairly standard parrot behaviour, really. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it in either. And I think, if you've got an individual in the family who is, very touchy-feely, doting, strongly bonds with that parrot, potentially you're going to have the recipe there for some problems later on. But then again, not in all cases. We've got 2 out of 11 birds of various ages, and, there's not a lot different in how we manage or handle each of them, but obviously we've had this behaviour become problematic in just those 2 examples.
Yeah. I think, obviously your situation's a little bit different, but I also think that occasionally it's, and probably more often than not in a lot of pet home situations, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, because people are so often told, this is a one-person bird, and so they go into the relationship wanting to make sure they're that one person for that bird because it's their bird. And in doing so, they kind of purposely cut other people out of the relationship, and that, also contributes to that behaviour. That's obviously not what happened with Scram specifically here. I think Danny is obviously a little bit of a different situation because he was Steve's one bird for a while. And that's, they spent a lot of time together, obviously. So Scram's a different situation.
Scram's unique. The other thing I think that happens often is it doesn't seem to be that common to have multiple bird people living in one house. And
yes,
I think you have one person who's very comfortable with the bird, and then another person who maybe they do want to interact with the bird, but they're a little bit scared when the bird tries to use their beak to step up, or, just does something that's quite normal. And then, I sort of mentioned earlier, people act weird when they're scared. If every time that the bird reaches out to step up, that person wobbles, they move their hand away, or, they're not very predictable, I think sometimes that can lead to what looks like one person bird behavior, but, really it's just that, the person's not behaving in a way that's predictable or safe.
Yeah.
And, again, there, I think you realistically go is, does this bird need to interact with other family members? And if it does, are there some skills that we can teach the bird and skills that we can teach the human to make that safe and predictable and fun? Because birds are a bit scary if you don't like them. They're pretty weird.
Absolutely. It's certainly, it's not like when people get dogs, often, everybody in the household's pretty, interested in the dog and normally interact with them. But with birds, it's often, like you said, a case of maybe you've only got one person in the household that's actually really wanting the bird, and the other person's like, okay, but I'm really uncomfortable with that beak.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they're big, like our green wing macaw, he's turning 11 this year. And people often go like, oh, that beak, it's so scary. And, in the time that we've had him, there's been one, we could call it a significant bite, one bite that broke the skin. And that was when Steve dared to offer him broccoli instead of capsicum while he was prepping some stir fry. But for the most part, like being bitten doesn't need to be part of the deal. I think if you're nice and predictable and you've got a solid reinforcement history for the things that are important for them to do on a day-to-day basis, it's quite possible to interact with parrots without getting bitten all the time. But I think certainly more commonly you'll see that people approach parrot ownership like, no, you're going to get bitten and it's just part of it. And if the beak belongs to anything bigger than a budgie, that's a pretty unpleasant kind of proposition. To be fair, even budgies, suck a little bit when they bite. So
sometimes those littler beaks they're worse because they pinch the skin.
Definitely as a kid, little female budgies got me, and it's not the best.
No. Awesome. So that's kind of all of the one-person bird questions. We did have one other question, which it's not necessarily relative to this particular topic, but I figured being that you are an expert nurse with avian experience, it might be a good one for you. Okay. So it was just basically any tips for vet students who are working around parrot patients.
Yep. I don't know about you, Lee. I think there is somewhat limited scope for what can happen in the moment of a consultation if no prior work has been done on the part of the owner. And so if that's what the situation is, and you've got a parrot with no husbandry behaviours trained, and they're quite stressed in the clinic, I would probably be looking for minimal restraint necessary and get the procedure done as quickly as possible. But otherwise, things like what I was talking about, introducing our parrots to new people, you can talk to the client and say, how do you usually ask this bird to step up? What treats does this parrot like? Hopefully you could have the clinic sort of ask, could you bring in some of the treats that this parrot likes, so that potentially you could have some positive interactions with the bird in that setting. And of course there's so much that clients can do to help make vet visits less stressful for their birds, but that's not really I guess that's more of a long-term training project that needs a little bit of client motivation. But yeah, certainly looking for, if you can see that parrot is interacting with the owner in a way that is lovely, asking, like, how does this bird like to be interacted with? Can I offer it some treats? Things like that can be, I think, quite nice. Certainly what I would look to do if I was interacting with parrots in a vet clinic, when I was working in a vet clinic, looking for little hints from the bird usually, are they moving towards me or away from me? If I offer them a treat, are they moving towards it or away? I'm trying to have some nice little happy interactions in what can sometimes be a really stressful situation.
Yeah. I think, I guess it also depends on what has to be done. If they're just coming in because the bird's got, a minor limp or something, and the owner can demonstrate that for you, and you can kind of stand at a distance and just observe, then obviously that's a lot less stressful. If they can, bring a good carrier, have a towel that they can use to cover the crate up with, weigh the bird before they get to the clinic, so that, you don't have to worry about the bird getting spooked by whatever, scales you're using in clinic. Those things can all be really, really helpful, because the more hands-off you can be, I think, depending on the bird, sometimes the better off you are. Some birds are super social and it's fine. So I think you've got to really take the animal that's in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, just from a client perspective, which, I have been a client, there are times where if there is something that needs to be done, and I can be quite lazy with my training sometimes. If there is a hole in the training, that means that this procedure is just going to need to be done with restraint, or it's not going to be very nice for the bird. Quite often, I don't necessarily want you to be my bird's friend. I would like for you to sort of efficiently and professionally do the thing that needs to be done as safely and appropriately as possible. And I would very much like for you to be the bad guy so that I don't have to be. So I think as well, like, consider what it is that needs to be done. And is this is this an emergency visit? Is this the only time you're going to see the bird? Or is this a bird that you're going to see every 6 months for a chronic health issue? Obviously, I guess the context really matters as to, again, how much effort it makes sense to put into being this bird's friend versus just getting the job done with as little stress as possible for everyone. Yeah, I agree. And I think probably the one big thing you could do is go and learn about Parrot body language, so that when those clients are coming into the clinic, you can read them well enough to understand, because there are often misinterpretations of body language, because birds can, they can do funny things, like suddenly they'll start talking a lot, but it doesn't necessarily, and often people are like, oh, he's so happy, he's having a chat, he's saying hello, or he's laughing. But for a lot of birds, that's, like that's not happy. There's a really great video that we use in some of our workshops of an Amazon, and the bird is like, oh, yeah. I knew you'd appreciate it. And this bird is laughing, and like it sounds like it would be happy, but it's like, I'm going to nail you. Yeah, see, I hear that noise coming from an Amazon, and I'm just like, nope.
Close the door and walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I'm out. Yeah, no. Amazons are a special species. Yeah, and like you said, but they are very, very good with their body language. They will make it abundantly clear that they are going to bite you.
Absolutely, crystal clear. Awesome. Well, that's it for the questions for tonight. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Anything that we've missed that you think we need to mention?
No, I think that's really it. For me, really, it's if you are living with a bird that has some history of aggressing towards other family members or visitors, it's really that management piece is, I think you're, if you're doing nothing else, manage it so that there is no opportunity to practice that sort of unhappy interaction, that behavior that you don't want. And then, if you decide to do more to try and improve the situation long-term, that's great. But, at a minimum, I think great management is going to keep everyone safe and minimize stress a huge amount. So management, prevention. I agree. There's and absolutely. Everybody stays safe. Everybody stays calmer. And certainly, if you want to make any progress, and the really big first step is that really solid management, because no amount of training is going to make much of any difference if that bird is practicing that behavior on a daily basis. So absolutely. And I can, if Danny was biting me every day, I would probably not still be here 10 years later. That's just a really unpleasant thing to live with. So absolutely. Yeah, that's it too. Like, you just can't expect people to be in that situation on a daily basis and put up with it. Yeah, for sure. No, that was awesome. Cool. Well, thank you very much, Belinda, for coming along and sharing your experiences, living this firsthand. I think that's really important for people to be able to, hear what someone, in that situation has kind of put in place and seen success with. And so really appreciate you coming on to chat about this. Yep. Awesome. No, it's a pleasure. Awesome. Excellent. All right. Well, I hope everybody got something fantastic out of that, and they can go away and implement some management strategies and maybe a little bit of training with their birds to help improve their lives. Again, thanks to Belinda for joining us. Everybody have a wonderful evening. See ya.